She is she's the executive director of BOSS, Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency, and we had earlier one of the representatives who actually get benefits from BOSS. She's worked for the past 30 years in BOSS, and she advocates on behalf of the homeless, poor, and disabled, and has helped create an award-winning organization that provides innovative programs to lift people out of homelessness. With degrees in journalism, economics, and divinity, she has served as on the boards of directors for Oxfam America, SIVA Foundation, Food First, Eureka Communities, California Homelessness and House Coalition, and others. Most recently, Western Regional Advocacy Project and Berkeley Community Coalition. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I wasn't sure whether I would show up and do a straight 30-minute keynote and probably not give you enough to kind of get fed on, or get up here and try and do something interactive, something with a little moving around, think if we can really get close to the issue instead of always depending on numbers and social policies, and where we're going to humanize the issue of poverty and homelessness and bring you some stories, tell you a little bit about BOSS, a little bit about me, and then open it up. I'm going to start with reading a statement that BOSS has just developed on equity. But before that, I want to welcome Max Anderson, City Council person. And earlier I saw Chris Worthington. Yes. And Steve, who is our housing director for quite some time, and good friends of BOSS and good friends of mine. We at BOSS, in recognition of systemic disparities which exist in our society, declare our unwavering commitment to the principles of quality and fairness, and our categorical rejection of prejudice, discrimination, and social injustice in all forms. In our nation, deep disparities abide in race, class, gender, and health. To that end, we recognize that equity extends beyond the limits of economic value to encompass all that which governs our social existence. BOSS believes that the persistence of economic inequity most profoundly impacts the critical needs of vulnerable populations. And this necessitates the decoupling of wealth and politics, or quote-unquote power. The members of BOSS stand united against the victimization of persons through devices of economic exclusion and impoverishment. We condemn exclusionary processes as gentrification, exploitation, and the passage of unfair policy measures that prohibit societal realization of economic equity. The perpetuation of injustice is an active process, and therefore we will require action. We envision equity as the equal distribution of opportunity and access to those opportunities by all parts and persons in our society. And we have dedicated ourselves to its actualization and progress. We hold that equity extends from the acknowledgement and acceptance of the intrinsic value of each person, and therefore is not a privilege, but a human right. Accordingly, we affirm that equity extends to the protection of other fundamental rights, among them democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Believing that equity arises from acts of service beyond oneself and working towards transformative change, we adamantly pledge our time, effort, and resources to counter the economic disadvantage experienced by the poor, and will work in solidarity with our partner organizations and our community toward a future where food, income, housing, and health care are affordable to all. We felt the need to do this as we've been witnessing for at least the last 10 years, the extreme widening gap between people who are extremely wealthy and people who are barely staying alive. And the latter part of the folks is who BOSS works with on a daily basis. Very interestingly enough, when we started to talk, BOSS is 40-some years old, and I've been with BOSS since it was about 4 months old. So I've sort of grown with the organization. and have learned a thing or two. When we were first sort of, challenged by hundreds of people coming out of the mental health hospitals and to the streets of Berkeley, our response was not what it needed to have been. We responded by, opening a center where people could get their mail, just your basic daily, meet those basic daily needs. Then shelters. What we didn't do that we needed to have done at that point when we discovered that while the hospitals had been closed and people were, people were moving back into the communities, that the communities did not have anything for people to come back to. So you went from the hospital to the street, and we responded. By 1976, it became really clear that people had to sleep somewhere. And it was 1976 when the first conversations at the council level started to be about homeless people are bad for business. So while you've heard the criminalization of homelessness and all of that, it goes way, way, way back. Homeless folks have always been arrested. Homeless folks have always been ticketed. Homeless folks have always been sent to jail. Not all of them, by no means. But where it has gotten us to is that in some jails, we now have somewhere between 10 to 25% of folks in jail who really need to be in mental health services. So we sort of, didn't catch us. When we really needed to build solutions in the community, we built Band-Aids. Instead of, standing up and organizing and going to the state and saying this will not work, we need to create community resources for people with, multiple challenges, who can have a life of dignity and a roof over their heads. We didn't quite do it well enough to get the resources that needed to have come to the community to make that happen. Fortunately, 35 years later, after much, conversation among the mental health field and the homeless providers and homeless experts, the Mental Health Services Act was passed. So in the last few years, we're asking our institutions to transform. We're asking not only to be service providers and not only to be helpers, but actually ensure that people on whose behalf we are working are completely included in the processes and decision-making that happens about their lives. One of the things that BOSS has done extremely well through his community organizing team is trained people who then go to where they're living to train other people to be able to stand here where I am, speak in public, talk to our politicians, demonstrate, organize, get arrested, whatever it takes. We feel very strongly that the shift that has happened in just the last year with the Occupy movement is an incredible opportunity for all of us to really start thinking about real solutions for people that have been left behind by bad policies and cuts in the federal, state, county, and city budgets for over 35 years. It's right now, standing here, I can tell you that if you walk into the home of a single mother with 2 kids, and luckily, if she has a 1-bedroom apartment or a studio or living in a transitional house, that you go and open their refrigerator and you will know how far deep we're slipping into poverty. You will find milk, bread, peanut butter. When you look for the more nutritious foods, they're not there. For me, that is inexcusable. What people eat on the streets, you're up here, you see it all, actually. In that way, you have a vantage point, and the community can really learn from your experiences as students with the homeless population. So the issue of hunger, an issue of not having a place to live, an issue of going from hospital straight into the street, or if you're lucky, getting a shelter bed, and if you're really lucky, maybe being able to find a place to live. These things have changed quite a bit, and I think it's important for all of us who are currently growing up in a recession. I believe it is a depression from where I sit and what I see and the issues and problems that are coming towards us. People who have lost their homes, people who have lost their jobs, people who are just coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, you name it. People being released from jails and prisons. 40,000 of them are headed our way in no time with no services in place. So once again, we're repeating what happened 40 years ago, which was a bad policy. You don't just let folks out when they have nowhere to go and no services available. That is happening again. Where people are coming out of is sometimes their first experience of poverty, their first experience for homelessness, but very quickly, if you're unemployed and stay unemployed for over a couple of years, the risk of staying in poverty and staying in homelessness increases. I also want to say a little bit about the children. A passion for me has been to try and ensure that homeless kids have access to education. By the time a child has been homeless for 2 years and has gone from shelter to shelter, or street to car to shelter, been probably in a home where there was violence, mom probably at some point had to be able to get food for her kids, had to do some things that weren't, would not happen if there was a secured income. Children tested after 2 to 3 years in homelessness, test very high with post-traumatic stress disorder. Where else does that happen? Somebody tell me? Where else does?
At war.
At war? Where else?
Natural disasters.
Natural disasters. So this is a war. Poverty, many, many times, for people who are living in it, looks like a war on them. Then when they lose their kids to jails, how many, does anybody know the number of African American young men who are now in jail on crimes that really, if they had had a better lawyer and they were a different color, would probably be out? How many? Does anybody know? It's about 20%. Ages 15 to 25. So we're really in trouble. I didn't want to come up here and just talk about what's right and what the solutions and stuff. I really want to, because you're emerging as future leaders, to really open your eyes to how difficult it is for people to have a dignified life, where they can live without the stigma of poverty, where they can take their kids to school without having to break their school year by, every year a different school. By the time we get the kids, they are, I'll try not to cry. I'm getting good at not crying. They are so, I don't want to use the word damaged, so somebody give me a better word.
Repressed.
No, let's give it a shot.
Hurt.
They are traumatized. I've seen kids who have stopped talking. I've seen kids who can only express themselves violently. I've seen kids who refuse to write or read. The trauma of homelessness, the trauma of being involved with parents who might be drug addicts, being involved with parents with a severe mental illness. By the time some of the kids are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, they're really the parents. Often, they are the parents. So with poverty getting deeper, with no commitment to build affordable housing for the folks that at least BOSS serves, who's the highest income of anybody we serve. If they're lucky and they get a job with BART, which happens occasionally, or AC Transit, or some other union job, most of our folks go into living, jobs at McDonald's, that's minimum wage with no benefits. And it's really worse now because when we were trying to do the best for folks that BOSS serves, and we serve about 2,000 homeless men, women, and children every year who have never been served before. These are new, brand new folks coming into the system with some other 1,500 folks that we serve ongoing. We're going to see an exponential growth in homelessness. And we're going to see the competition for the services that normally went and were targeted for homeless folks jammed with everybody new that's entering the mainstream, not the mainstream, but entering the system. In Alameda County last year, and BOSS organized and fought and organized, and we spent months, it felt like, doing nothing but trying to save, now I think of it as saving people's income, saving their dignity, along with all the people who were in the general assistance system. Alameda County wanted to cut the entire general assistance grant of $300 and some a month to some 10,000 people. And then expected that the same thing would happen that happened during welfare reform. Anybody here old enough to remember welfare reform? Okay. Anybody here who doesn't know what that was? Okay. At the federal level, there was legislation passed when President Clinton was in office and Newt Gingrich was the speaker. And for whatever reasons, they were able to come together and come up with this terrible law called TANF, Temporary Assistance for Families in Need. Thank you. I'm glad I have my folks here to keep me on track. It was a good law at that time, but it wasn't thought out well enough for 30 years or 40 years. So at that time, when the economics were really, really good, and so people, of course, got jobs and left that system. Now, a majority of people who were in the system at that point had only 5 years of aid. 5 years in your lifetime. That aid is now being cut to 4 years. That aid is now down to, and if the state of California has its way, only the children will get aid and the parents won't. So you really have to, really wake up, because what's happening right now is going to leave people so far behind. And we're already behind in education as a nation. We're already behind in child mortality. We're already, our hunger lines are growing faster than anything else. We have to figure out how we're going to turn this baby around. I don't trust that we're going to get much until the next election, and who knows who will get that. But all of us need to do something every day of our lives and influence somebody who's in power to think again about the future of not just the children, but the future of a whole generation in this country that's going to grow up poor, less educated, have less access than we've ever seen before. At the rate that the programs that keep a nation civil are being cut, a number of things can happen. Of course, we could have a revolution. Of course. It's happened before, it could happen again. We could also look at this country's military budget and really examine that budget to see what's really going on. Can anybody tell me what percentage of our taxes go towards the military budget?
Is it 75?
It's 55%.
Oh, wow.
So if you take $55 out of 100 and nobody can touch it, I can actually give you some really cool statistics. I was told that to throw in a few statistics would be a kind thing to do, so let me see if I can find some good ones here. You keynote at a university, you better have some statistics. And I told somebody who asked me earlier what I was going to do, and I said stand-up comedy, but they said, please, no. It's 55% of the federal budget. In comparison, we spend 5% on health. 5%. What we spend on housing and community is another 5%. Now we know that in a globalized world, that we better be smart enough to deal with what's going on, because when Greece gets a little shook up, it affects us. And yet we spent only 4% of our money towards the well-being of the world. It just doesn't match up. It says government only 6%, but I didn't believe that. I thought maybe there's I think government is a little bigger than 6%. Food. Somebody tell me what percent we spend on food for people who need food.
0.
It's not that bad, but it's 1%, you know? We just made progress from 0 to 1%, just sitting here. We're doing all right. Let me say a little bit about wars. I've lived in a war. I know the damage that a war does to the country that the war is happening in, and the damage it does to America when it sends its young people to another country to fight a war. That when they come back, it adds not only the war costs that we were spending while we were at war, but what we have to spend to then help and support and sustain our soldiers who come back. We never anymore get to see what war really looks like. In the Vietnam era, war was on in our living rooms every night. Now, it's just a dark screen with little red or green dots going back and forth. And yet, when it comes to a place like Syria, where they're showing everything that's going down in the streets and everything that's happening, we don't see that about Afghanistan. We didn't see that about Iraq because we were involved. So these like hidden wars, extremely expensive while they're happening, and then taking away resources from all of us who are here and everyone that we know. Now I know there aren't too many people here who are in the top 3% to 5% or 10%, but I know there are folks in here who are, you know, more sort of the 50 and below. If we don't get involved, if we don't get to know each other and begin to develop movements and organize and be present and show up, who is going to do it? That's my challenge to young folks, is come on, you know, along with your degree, along with your education, if you can't combine that with direct experience, making things change and be better for not just folks at the bottom, but everybody, then all the education that you're getting, you're only going to be able to apply that in very limited constructs. Are you with me on that one? So the broader we, you know, take our consciousness and the higher commitment that we make to some level of transformation in this country, which at some point in the future will have an opportunity to return back to its own very core values. And when we talk about values, you know, it's part of the value system, almost bit me, part of the value system that, you know, the two parties are personal values, family values, all of that. That's all a whole lot of noise. Because what it does, it takes our mind away from what we really need to do. And we become carried away on the, you know, the noise of the elections, the rhetoric, and all of that. The bottom line is, people are getting poor. Homeless people have no way to get out of homelessness. So we are going to see more of them in the streets in the next 5-10 years. Mothers can't go to school because they don't have childcare for their kids. The kids are behind in school. They're not going to make it up through get to higher education. So at some point, and it might not be, you know, it might even be the end of this year when the whole budget crisis hits us again. We cannot go any further with the policies that are currently being played out at, luckily not our own city level, but at the county, at the state, and the federal levels. There is no way for this country to get back on track, because taxes will only be raised up to a point that the corporations will allow them to be raised, or rich people will allow them to be raised. But we can do something about trying to at least talk with not our Congress people. You know, we live on an island. Let's admit it. Berkeley, the Bay Area, you know, progressive, the people we've sent to Washington are great. What we need to do is during the next election, get out to those communities that are not like this and talk with people to ensure that we get a result that is more palatable than the one that we might get. I'm going to stop now because once you put me up here, I can go on forever. Does anybody have any questions? To respond to it in a couple of ways. Yes, it creates jobs. It also creates death. You know, I've never known in the history of time where any community that had weapons, whether it was, you know, arrows, that didn't go to war. So for me, that connection between, you're building it to use it. You're not building it to just keep it around. Or you're building it to sell it cheaper when we don't want it to other countries. If you look at Africa and the militarization of Africa and whose arms are being used, a lot of it's the stuff that goes from this country. If you look at Mexico and the weapons that are being used in Mexico in the drug war are weapons that have come from here. So we have enough. Maybe this is how I would answer it. We can also create the same jobs if we decide to shift our energy policy. For every job lost in the military, we could create a job for somebody to put up a solar panel. It's not that there aren't options, it's that we're not choosing those options. The United States is behind China in its energy policy. So we're not headed in the best of directions, but it does come around, so that's where the hope is. So there's lots of other ways to create jobs. And who is in the military? You know, we have to look at who is in the military. It's not the senators and the congresspeople, and you know, it's not their kids. It's not even kids that come out of affluence. The majority of our military is now young kids who have little opportunity, low education, and feel that that is one way out for them out of the life that they're living, where they can't see a future. And that they truly believe they will get a training, they will get a trade, they can come back and be part of the community. And yes, for many of them that happens, but many, many, many more come back wounded. You know, we don't talk about the 30,000 wounded from Iraq. We never even get to see any pictures. It's like, didn't happen. We just talk about the deaths. So we pay a heavy price. So the sooner we turn towards more a peaceful economy, jobs that, you know, create better life for all of us, the sooner I think we'll start to maybe, something that's always amused me about the United States and the English language is that when we want to change something, we say, oh, let's declare a war on it. And you know, right away that says, I'm poor, they're declaring a war on me. You know, what was the war on poverty? So we got some good programs. War on drugs, we got more drugs. I mean, it's just, you know, and we spend trillions and trillions of dollars on these wars that, you know, another question.
You talked about welfare reform.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the current push that is going on to test welfare, people who receive welfare for drug use or drugs?
I think as soon as we start testing all the corporate CEOs of the alcohol content in their bodies and whatever else might be in their bodies and then remove them from their positions of power, I'd say, hey, go for it. Equity, you know? It's really, really unfair that because you don't have a home or because you're poor, that you are criminalized for doing the same things that you can do when you're wealthy and get away with it. Yeah? Does that mean my half an hour is up, or does that mean you really like me and you're inviting me to dinner? Stay? 2 minutes? Okay, 2 more questions. One?
In terms of the healthcare side, in dealing with homelessness, how do you think Obamacare plays out in that role? Is it an advancement towards more equity, or it's just another solution that they're trying to provide?
Okay, I'll try and be generous here. It will, provide access to more people to enter the healthcare system and have access to services. Obamacare also does some other really great things. But where I think it falls short is that it's not healthcare for everybody at the same cost, irregardless of how rich or poor you are. It falls way, way short of that. I think it will continue to make insurance companies richer. I think it will continue to make doctors richer. I think it will continue to make pharmaceutical people richer. I don't think any of that is going to change that much. But I think access will be different, and over time, maybe we can take out the kinks. All the more reason to, vote for whom. Okay, thank you very, very much.